This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we turn now for more on BP and the worst environmental catastrophe in U.S. history to two guests. Robert Reich is with us, the former Secretary of Labor under President Clinton, now a professor of public policy at the University of California, Berkeley. And joining us from Washington, D.C., Tyson Slocum, the Director of Public Citizens Energy Program. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Let's turn to Robert Reich. You're calling for the, well, putting BP into temporary receivership. Can you explain what you think should happen now?
Well, Amy, to me, it is simply impermissible to have the rescue operation, the operation that is trying to plug the hole at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico and contain the oil spill, under the direct control of the same company, BP, that was responsible, whose recklessness and negligence seems to have generated all of this to begin with. A company that has a history of cutting corners. 5 years ago, the North Slope of Alaska, one of the worst oil spills we've ever experienced up there. The same company. BP should not be doing this. BP should be paying for it. But actually, the operation ought to be under the direct control of the United States. The Commander-in-Chief of the United States, the President, has got to know what's going on, summon the right resources, whether it's the Navy, the Marines. Certainly, BP's expertise should be used, but that expertise needs to be under the direct control of the President.
But what about the president's repeated statements that BP is in charge and it's their responsibility to clean up the mess they made?
Well, and certainly it's their responsibility to pay for it, and we need to use whatever expertise they have. If Tony Hayward's testimony yesterday is any evidence of their expertise, there isn't very much expertise. I mean, Tony Hayward seemed like he didn't know what was going on. But my point is not so much in the payment. Yes, BP should pay for it, but in terms of the actual execution of the whole job of stopping this leak and containing the spill and cleaning everything up, it should not be under the direct control of BP. There's no reason to trust BP. I mean, BP has continuously lied to us with regard to the amount of oil that was being generated from that hole. BP has continually failed to balance the public interest accurately against corporate interests. BP is under the direct financial and legal requirement that it maximize shareholder returns, not that it protect the United States, not that it guarantee the security of American citizens and the environment. BP should not be in control of this operation.
I'd like to ask you, we played the clip of Representative Joe Barton calling President Obama's meeting with BP executives a shakedown. But I want to quote to you from a prior hearing, a congressional hearing 4 years ago on BP, what Joe Barton said then. He said this was in dealing with the spill that occurred in Alaska. And Barton said, if one of the world's most successful oil companies can't do simple, basic maintenance needed to keep the Prudhoe Bay field operating safely without interruption, maybe it shouldn't operate the pipeline. Barton went on to say, I'm even more concerned about BP's corporate culture of seeming indifference to safety and environmental issues, and this comes from a company that prides itself in its ads on protecting the environment. Shame, shame, shame. That was Joe Barton 4 years ago, but now he's saying that President Obama is shaking down the company. Your response?
Yeah, well, look at Representative Barton, the senior ranking Republican on the Energy and Commerce Committee there. He has a view. I don't share it, obviously, but some Republicans, most Republicans, and a lot of apparently Tea Partiers and others share the view that if it comes down to who you trust least, big government or big corporations and Wall Street, they trust big government less than they trust big corporations and Wall Street. And frankly, when we have seen what's happened, Wall Street's near meltdown and Goldman Sachs depredations, when we've looked at Massey Energy and what's happened to the miners in that terrible explosion, when we've looked at what the oil companies, BP has done, or the insurance companies such as WellPoint, the last 5 months have been a kind of a lesson to a lot of Americans in what corporations will do in pursuit of profit if they are not checked by government. We need not only appropriate regulation, but we need to go beyond appropriate regulation. I mean, what we should have done with Wall Street is to cap the size of those firms, use the antitrust laws, make sure that no big Wall Street bank is too large to fail. What we should have done with health care is make sure that there was a public option or Medicare for all, rather than continuing to allow the entire health care system of America to be under the control of private for-profit insurance companies that are not in the interest and are not acting in the interest of the public. What we needed to do in the Gulf and what we need to do right now is to put the president directly in charge of the cleanup effort. Because, again, it's not that these big companies are totally untrustworthy. They are very trustworthy in one very narrow respect, and that is maximizing the returns to their shareholders. That's what they are set up to do. They are not set up to respond to the public interest.
So what's stopping President Obama from doing this, doing what you're calling for in the Gulf and on the other issues you're talking about? Many people feel that they voted for him because they thought he would do these things.
Amy, I think that there are a couple of things, and I scratched my head to try to figure it out. I mean, one is that he is confronted with a requirement in the Senate of getting 60 votes, and he barely can summon 60 votes. Now, that raises another interesting question. Why doesn't he and why don't the Democrats and the leadership say, look, the 60-vote supermajority is not in the Constitution. There is no reason we have to continue to subscribe by it, but let's just take for at least now, the stipulation that he's got to get 60 votes. Also, the big corporations, have never, in my experience, and I've been in and out of Washington for 30 years, have never had the clout, the power that they have right now. I mean, they are inundating Congress and members of Congress, Senate and representatives with money, campaign money. They're distributing campaign money all over the place. Their lobbyists are all over the place. There is not countervailing power in Washington of a sort that we saw, let's say, 40 years ago, when you had big corporations, but you also had very powerful unions, when you had very powerful environmental groups that really could take on big corporations head-to-head, toe-to-toe. Right now, you've got a situation in Washington such as I have never seen. I think that probably we've not seen since the late 19th century, when the robber barons of oil and finance and the great trusts ran roughshod over democracy.
I'd like to bring in Tyson Slocum of a Public Citizen into the conversation. You've called for the federal government to suspend its contracts with BP. Could you talk about what those contracts are and also about BP's record, which, if we were talking about street crime, we'd call them a predicate felon?
Right. Public Citizen researched and found that BP has over $2 billion in outstanding contracts to deliver oil and fuel to the Department of Defense. And we believe that BP's habitual corporate criminal record, two of the company's U.S. subsidiaries are currently on criminal probation and were actually debarred by the Environmental Protection Agency under its authority under the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, the two statutes that the company pled guilty to federal criminal violations. And we feel that BP, that providing services to the federal government is a privilege, not a right, and that taxpayers should not be spending over $2 billion to give to a company while it destroys the ecosystem and the livelihoods of millions of people in the Gulf of Mexico. You have to remember that what's happened here in the Gulf is not an isolated incident in BP's history. BP has the worst track record of any oil company operating in America. They've paid more than $700 million to settle allegations of wrongdoing in the last couple of years. But we also have to recognize that problems in ultra-deepwater drilling are not just isolated with BP. As we learned when the 5 major oil companies testified before Congress earlier this